It's genuinely hard to believe that Ground Control 2 came out in 2004. This was the same year Half-Life 2 raised the graphical bar, a few scant years before Crysis would become a benchmarking meme. Graphics technology was moving quickly back then, to put it mildly. But it goes without saying, the strategy games of this era did not look this good. That's not to denigrate the many wonderful strategy games released in and around 2004, but I do not believe anybody could say with a straight face that Rome Total War or Dawn of War were graphical powerhouses. But I would argue that's exactly what Ground Control 2 is. Yet the game has more or less been completely forgotten by the wider strategy scene, despite containing some genuinely surprising graphical flourishes that even put some modern games to shame. Take, for example, the game's marvelous skyboxes, which, if you're not familiar, is a rendering technique for displaying backgrounds outside of the game's playable area. For one thing, it's notable they put that much work into the skybox in a game in the genre known for looking down from above. Rarely has moving the camera to odd angles in a strategy game been more visually rewarding. I should also note that this was achieved using their own game engine developed in-house. I can't possibly imagine this was as simple as dragging and dropping a skybox component into a scene and slotting a few objects. Moreover, all these skyboxes still look great, despite being over 2 decades old. And with the campaigns taking place over several planets, there's even a good variety of celestial objects up there. The game really wants to show you these vistas. Even if you don't ever think to look up, almost all the missions end with the camera panning around scripted locations, showing off the best visuals each map has to offer. This is an audacious flex that I legitimately can't think of any other strategy games doing. The focus in many of these flybys are often the impressive array of buildings and miscellaneous doodads decorating the scene. This is particularly impressive in urban missions. On that note, I cannot overstate how much I love city maps in strategy games. Even after being forced by my friends at gunpoint to play Edelbrook Station and Sittard Summer for collectively hundreds of hours, as a child, I gladly garrisoned every building I could in Red Alert 2 just to see how they changed visually. I was delighted to find out that the buildings in Ground Control 2 similarly provide a defensive bonus, with you even able to see inside the structure. In terms of other objects, I absolutely love the design of these bridges, though I'm not sure how structurally sound they would be in real life. There's also some rather impressive set pieces to fight around, such as this gigantic deep space radar array very clearly inspired by the Arecibo telescope. Others are even destructible, like this impressive planetary defense cannon. But the game's visual splendor runs a lot deeper than what you see on the maps. I want to specifically commend the talking heads. These are flat out exceptional for 2004. Just look at the absolute aura on General Warhurst here. The eye, the scar, the eternal cigar. His design is without question one of the greatest talking head portraits ever. It's a shame that he betrays you late in the campaign, in order to have you fight your own faction in the game's penultimate chapters.
I knew there was something fishy about Warhurst. Never trust a guy that doesn't use contractions when he talks.
Definitely a victim of the law of conservation of characters. Speaking of, the game also features its own weirdly chauvinistic guy, which seems to be a surprisingly popular archetype in early 2000s strategy games. I can't give him too much guff though. Even in his limited role in the game, he has more of an arc than Earth 2160's Faulkner. Your point of view commander character, Jacob, and his wife have pretty decent models as well. I particularly like Jacob's hat, featured prominently in the advertising. Your on-map hero unit for most of the game, Lieutenant Rowe, is a little bit gawky by contrast, but he still has his charms.
And Sergeant, where did you get that APC?
Well, you know that big knife I always carry?
Never mind. I don't want to know.
Of course, no discussion of early 2000s video game graphics would be complete without talking about the proliferation of particle effects. Now, maybe I'm imagining a pattern that isn't actually there, but I can't help but think 3D particle effects were going through a renaissance back then in the same way ray tracing is now. Of course, the graphics technique had been around for quite a while at this point, even in the 3D context, but there's something I find particularly compelling about its usage here. For example,
Look! Bang! ads!
The list of strategy games that simulate flocks of birds purely for the aesthetics is not a long one. In fact, I'm struggling to think of a second one. Let me know if you can think of any in the comments. I love these little guys. Perhaps this was the period it started to be feasible to use meshes in particle systems, which I think might be what's going on here. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, this wasn't achieved using Unreal or other out-of-the-box engines. They didn't just drag and drop a particle system component into the scene and slot in a mesh. This was all done in-house, as was the style for most strategy games back then. Ground Control 2 also features a variety of environmental weather effects. While these kind of effects were starting to become standard at this point, the execution is particularly strong here. But the star of the show has to be the weapon effects. Your primary faction, the North Star Alliance's shots, pack a satisfying punch. The Virons, the more alien faction's attacks, produce eerie green energy, quite scathing in hindsight. Rockets are impressively physically simulated as well. They can be intercepted mid-flight by anti-missile fields. Most impressively, artillery shells arc far into the sky in a way I've never seen before or since. The blows they land are slow but devastating, if it doesn't impact on a shield. Vehicle death explosions are kind of hilariously over the top too, especially the way the vehicle models flip around. And last but certainly not least, infantry units fucking gib on death.
Holy shit.
Moving on from the flashy and fleshy effects, there's some rather impressive subtle details I'd be remiss not to call out. Going back to the opening shot, note the reflections in the water. Good-looking water effects are common these days, but this is kind of absurd for 2004, especially for a strategy game. On that note, while it's not new to the genre, it's worth relishing the quality lighting and dynamic shadows on display in all this. Though Ground Control 2 lacks a full day-night cycle as seen in games like Earth 2150. Something special that might actually be fully unique to Ground Control 2 is how the game models footsteps. If you look close enough, you can see the cycle of a footstep object being created and stretched on the ground to achieve the effect. While this seems a lot less impressive than deforming the terrain slightly for each and every footstep, it's a pretty good bet this was considerably more performant, which I'm sure was critical at the time. Now all of these effects would be undercut tremendously if the units producing them were ill-modeled and badly animated, but as you can clearly see, that is not the case. Not only are these good-looking models, some of them have an impressive level of animation, like activating the defensive mode of a Ravager Pterodyne. Even incidental mission-specific vehicles like these mining rigs look great for only being used once. Each faction's armies are quite visually cohesive, though I specifically enjoy the insectoid nature of the Viron faction, and their mothership kind of reminds me of the Leviathans from Metroid Prime 3. You get to see this model spectacularly eviscerated in one of the game's pre-rendered cutscenes. These were made with Lightwave 3D according to the game's short making-of video. Ground Control 2 doesn't have many cutscenes, but I really appreciate the quality of the few we got. For example, the intro cutscene is quite the barn burner. I should also say there's quite a few in-engine cutscenes. Not like Earth 2160 level, but enough that it adds a nice bit of story to the mission experience itself. Something impressive that you can't actually tell from this footage is that the game can run at high frame rates. YouTube videos cap out at 60 frames per second, but the game itself goes considerably higher. You love to see it. If you dig into the game's settings menu, you can find some rather impressive graphical options, including support for both high refresh rates and even 4K resolution. I always appreciate when developers let you push the frame rate this high. It generally means they've done work to ensure that the important simulation bits are not tied to the frame rate. In Unity, this is the difference between putting stuff in the update function, which is rendered every frame, versus the fixed update function, which is independent of frame rate. I'm sure they had something like this dynamic going on in their engine. Anyhow, all of this adds up to the best looking ground-based strategy game of the early 2000s. Again, looking at the competition, it's not particularly close, especially in terms of how the graphics have aged, or to be more precise, how they have not. But merely talking about Ground Control 2's graphics would be doing the game a disservice. There's a lot of unique mechanics that make the game strangely compelling even all these years later. To start, you'll notice I've specifically avoided calling it an RTS. That's because it's not one, strictly speaking. It's a real-time tactics game, or RTT for short. Note the lack of any base building or resource collection. Sure, there's an economy of sorts, destroying enemy units gives you points to request more units, but there's no resource collection in the traditional ore or Tiberium sense. The focus is on the combat, ordering your units, positioning them, and using their abilities wisely when engaging the enemy. Of these gameplay elements, it really can't be overstated how important positioning is here. Units generally require line of sight to attack. If that line of sight is blocked by an unaccounted for hill, well, you're not gonna get very far. But you've generally got some room to course correct for two key reasons. Number one, the time to kill in Ground Control 2 is among the highest in any strategy game I've ever played. Everything from basic infantry units all the way up is a brick of hit points, requiring significant concentrated weapons fire for anything to go down quickly. And number two, any damage incurred can be quickly repaired by engineer units, which themselves can spider tank each other forever at no resource or energy cost. Though the range they can heal is rather limited, so they too must be positioned wisely within your forces. Thinking on it, the vibe of this is not entirely unlike fleet engagements I've had in EVE Online. Adding to this feeling is that most of the fights happen at long range, with some units even able to fire accurately at something a screen away. The previously mentioned artillery can be quite useful to suppress whole areas, but are comically inaccurate when aimed at units in motion. The AI's artillery, though, will keep you on your toes, if you don't neutralize the shells of defensive fields. It can sometimes be difficult to tell where long-range enemy fire like this is coming from, but helpfully weapons fire is reflected on the minimap, which is a fun touch. Anyhow, while the single-player campaign is quite impressive, the game's most impressive feature has to be the drop-in-out multiplayer. This is where a player can join an in-progress multiplayer match as seamlessly as if it was an FPS game. The idea is, after you join, you fly in units at a landing zone and immediately press the attack on the enemy's controlled territory. This is a feature that is heartbreakingly rare in the entire strategy game genre. Unfortunately, as you might expect, Ground Control 2's multiplayer has been turned off for a decade. While I personally didn't play it back in the day, I did play quite a bit of World in Conflict's multiplayer around its release. World in Conflict was the developer of Ground Control 2's next game, and you can tell they iterated quite a bit on its ideas, especially in the multiplayer. But alas, its multiplayer was also shut down a decade ago. You better believe World in Conflict is on my potential video list though, just to talk about the stellar campaign. Incidentally, also on my list is Nexus the Jupiter incident, which, seemingly against all odds, also had drop-in-out multiplayer. I'm very grateful to have played it when it had an active community. Absolute tragedy that so few people knew it even had this kind of multiplayer gameplay. I would not be surprised to find out that there are flat out no actively played strategy games right now with drop-in-out multiplayer. Anyhow, while the game's strongest points are inarguably its graphics and unique gameplay, I do have a soft spot for Ground Control 2's story, especially in the wake of finishing my Earth 2160 video.
Years of my youth.
By contrast, the year Ground Control 2 takes place in is 2741, way off in the super future. So you don't have tanks, you have pterodynes. You don't have helicopters, you have helidynes, and so on. I think they just really like the dynes suffix. The game's background lore is a heady mix. Little bit Battletech with distant far-flung colonies uniting to form factions. Little bit Titanfall 2 with spacefaring megacorporations. The current situation is pretty easy to figure out, with the bad guys being the Terran Empire, who are attempting a violent reconquista against the North Star Alliance. The campaign focuses on the North Star Alliance colony of Morningstar Prime, which is an objectively cool name for a planet. Probably also the name of a weapon in Warframe, too. A few missions into the campaign, you encounter the aforementioned aliens, the Virons. They're kind of a glup shitto species, honestly. Their speech patterns are interesting, but get a little grating over time.
can be useful to NSA, not allied with Empire. All rogue and enemies of Imperator, Flana, and the traitor, hold the path.
The story the campaign tells is pretty decent, all things considered. The stakes feel significant with you having to defend against the unstoppable invasion force, gaining new allies in the Virons, and finally evacuating in a salvaged megaship, conducting the titular Operation Exodus. Realistically, there's no way in hell the 4 evacuation shuttles could fit even a portion of the planet's population, but I'll accept some creative license. It is a legitimately cool moment. So I've been glazing the game up until this point, but I would be doing everyone, particularly those who might be interested in picking it up on Steam, a disservice if I didn't go through some of the more pervasive issues. The biggest issue I have with the gameplay presents itself as early as the second mission. You are thrown into a wide open map clearly inspired by D-Day, and you have to take and hold all the territory on the map. Makes sense, right? The name of the game is Ground Control 2 after all. But the issue crops up with the behavior of the AI. It backcaps like you would not believe. If you've ever fought the AI in Company of Heroes 2, you know this behavior well. The enemy units are insanely slippery, and I kinda just hate it. I realize this is something of a self-report on my skill at mitigating it, but this straight up isn't that fun to fight against. Especially this early in the campaign where you don't have combat engineers to heal your troops, making it a war of attrition. I kind of get it thematically, but still, not great. 2 years after Ground Control 2 released, Company of Heroes would deliver the definitive D-Day experience in what is perhaps the greatest first mission tutorial sequence in the entire strategy game genre. Moving on, while the game itself doesn't have a resource-gathering economy, it does have an economy in the sense of farming kills to generate enough points to build up an army. This can lead to the first chunk of many missions just being hanging around your landing zone, grinding. You have to grind for an obnoxious amount of time if you want to build up an army to advance with, and enough forces to defend your landing zone from backcapping. Moving your units comes with some annoyances as well. Namely, the deeply repetitive confirmation barks.
We can do it. Yes, sir. We can do it. Yes, sir. At once. Yes, sir. We can do it. Yes, sir. At once.
The voice acting is fine, but there just aren't that many different barks. This may seem like a relatively minor issue, but it piles up quickly when you're issuing orders rapidly. Adding to this, the game has a relatively low selection capacity, 16 units, which, sure, is bigger than StarCraft 1's 12, but in a game like this, it's still a really painful limit, requiring you to run quite a few different groups just to keep everything moving at once. I can't help but think this limit was imposed for the user interface so there wouldn't be too many icons at once, but what do I know, I'm backend, not UX. Some missions have rather unfortunate designs. There's a good set of baseless missions in the game, and I regret to inform you that some of them are stealth missions. Yeah, sorry, I'm just gonna say it, stealth missions in the traditional sense of the word have no place in the strategy game genre. One of the offenders is a kind of half-baked stealth where the enemy units are on set paths and just kind of run around, not really even hunting you on detection. But this is a breath of fresh air compared to the stealth mission near the end of the Viron campaign. In this mission, you have to prevent any single infantry unit you encounter from running to a nearby base and reporting you. If they do, you lose. Yeah, that's right, flat out fail-state stealth, in a mission where you are hoofing it the entire time, and it's difficult to tell if you've even been spotted. No thank you. I cranked it down to easy, and it still took an annoying number of saves and reloads. Late in the Viron campaign, there's a mission where you encounter the crashed megaship that you need to secure to evacuate Morningstar Prime, the Astrid. The mission is titled Dead But Dreaming, which I could have sworn before I got to it again was called Dead But Still Dreaming. Must have been the Mandela effect somehow. The Astrid is gigantic, visible in the minimap even. The scale here is amazing in a way that I wouldn't see again until Deserts of Karak. The music track is even a reverent chant of a sort. The hype is real. This is an objectively cool setup for a mission, but everything is spoiled in the execution. For one thing, your on-map Viron allies die almost immediately with no replacing units, which is especially annoying as you have to defend various pillars around the map from being destroyed or you lose the mission. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that the objective of this mission is to eliminate every single enemy unit. Now, I've seen this kind of condition work in strategy games where they give you nudge pings in the right direction, but here you're given nothing to work with, other than recon aircraft which can at least scan in a wide area. It took me a ridiculous amount of time to discover the final wayward enemy infantry unit, which surprisingly looks like it may have gotten hung up on the map somehow. Really deflated what otherwise would have perhaps been the game's most iconic mission. Now, from this point, most of the issues I have are arguably nitpicks, but I still think they're material enough to mention. For a game called Ground Control 2, there's a rather remarkable lack of feedback on the status of the actual ground that you fight for the control of. You get to see the color change with ownership, but it's left unclear what the control radius is, how far along the capture process is, and so on. I realize that by the time you're on the point, it's largely irrelevant and will flip anyway, but a little more clarity may have been good. Sometimes units will be unceremoniously shoved by other units pathing through them. This is admittedly kind of funny, but it does hurt the feeling of weight otherwise heavy units might have. In a game with nigh flawless graphics, it's a bit surprising to encounter what I'm pretty sure is the classic uncapped FPS on a menu screen issue. While I can't prove this outright, I can hear my graphics card entering jet engine mode. Kind of a shame really, as the menu screen is among the best I've seen for its time period. A lot of quality animation, cool structures even. Structures which never come into play in the campaign, but still. And finally, this is probably the result of the game not exactly being designed for 4K monitors, but the edges of the minimap are covered by the flavor UI elements around them. Party foul, especially given how often important objectives are on the edge of the map. Again, this is almost certainly an artifact of running it at modern resolutions. Given the shift in aspect ratio itself, I don't even know if they could have realistically prevented this ahead of time, but still, annoying. Now, to be clear, I'm not looking to roast the developers. I watched an interview with the game's programming lead, and it alluded to a lot of turbulence during the game's production. He seemed downright apologetic.
I was the lead programmer on Ground Control 2, and it's really the game that I'm the least proud of, almost a little bit embarrassed by the legacy of Ground Control 1 being so poorly followed up. So I apologize. I wasn't really happy at all with a lot of things in Ground Control 2.
Honestly, having played through the entirety of it recently, I still think the game deserves significant praise for what it does right. Now, unlike the developers of most of the games I've covered on this channel, not only is the company that made Ground Control 2, Sweden's Massive Entertainment, still around, a genuinely surprising number of the game's developers are in the credits of the studio's latest game, Star Wars Outlaws. Yeah, I know, right? That's quite the pivot from making strategy games to making open-world games for Ubisoft. I'm now actually curious to play it, if I can get a complete edition for like $20. I find Ubisoft's monetization strategy extremely off-putting, though I certainly enjoyed Andor recently if the game's anything like that. I should say Massive Entertainment is in good company in their native Sweden. There is of course DICE, which you may remember from Battlefield Bad Company 2 and a few other lesser games. There's Paradox, rebuilding Stellaris every 2 years and making all those other map painting games. There's even whatever Coffee Stain Studios is doing other than releasing an expansion to Satisfactory. You might think I forgot Remedy Entertainment, but they're actually from Finland, which my partially Swedish wife assures me is not the same thing. Anyhow, that's pretty much everything I have to say about Ground Control 2. I'm not exactly gonna hold my breath for a new game in the series, though I recall receiving an email from either the publisher, Rebellion, or Massive themselves like 2 decades ago asking for story suggestions. I presume they sent that email to everyone who had registered their game, which was a thing people did back then. I'd never seen a company do that before. Pity nothing seems to have come of it. I'm gonna guess Rebellion still has the rights to Ground Control, but after their last attempt to revive a beloved strategy simulation game went so poorly, I wouldn't expect them to do anything with it, in-house or otherwise. To say nothing of other recent high-profile strategy game revival failures that I'm still mad about. Who knows though? A surprising number of independent developers have been stepping up in recent years with strategy game projects. It's entirely believable one of them may eventually come out with the kind of gameplay that made Ground Control 2 and World in Conflict so special. Hope springs eternal.